Welcome everybody to my Blood Angels tutorial, first proper tutorial I'm doing on the channel, and it's going to be a full length one, but it is sped up 2 times just because we'd be sat here for over an hour. Starting off with a black primer, and then we're doing a white centerfold. Here you can see on the model what I'm pointing at are the high points, and when you have black with a light above it, where the light shines is where you want your volumetric lights to be, and by that you can build up a really nice gradient on the model. Now obviously we are painting these to, I would say, a high tabletop standard, so we're not following the volumetric lighting to the key, because we want these to look good from every angle. Now if this was for a competition, I would certainly play into that volumetric lighting a lot more, so that's something to take into consideration. For instance, the left leg is pretty much under his body, and it would have no colour going off volumetric lighting, but for the sake of this we are putting white in there, but we're not going crazy bright like we are on the shoulder pads and the helmet. So one thing as well, when you are certainly airbrushing white, is it takes quite a few coats to get to that pure white that we're after in those highest spots. So what this does though is it allows itself to give you that transition on the panels. So you sort of end up with this grey white in between the black and the white, which is our mid-tone. So that's something to keep in mind, is when you are working on these models, is to allow that sort of blend to happen. And I will just say as well, when you're painting white, you're going to get some of those speckling effect on the model. Now this is just a characteristic of using white, because the pigment in lighter color paints, especially white, yellow, pinks, are a lot bigger, which means it's harder for it to pass through the airbrush, and usually it collects on the end of the needle a lot more than what a blue or a purple or a red would do. So that's something to take into consideration. Constantly keep your needle tip clean and you'll have no issues whatsoever. But those speckles do basically disappear anyway once we actually apply more colour to the model. So with the white done, we're going to be moving on to an oil wash, but before that we need to give the model a gloss varnish. The reason for this is it allows the paint to flow into those recesses, and it also allows cleanup to be a lot easier than without it. If you don't have oil paints, you can do a panel wash or a pin wash with your known oil or whatever it is you're using. You can change up the colour depending on your army. You could do purple with red, or you could do like a Prussian blue with space wolves, or like a Drakenhof nightshade, something like that. If you're new to using oils, probably one of the hardest things you'll do is to get the consistency down, because you want the paint to just magically flow into those recesses pretty much with the touch of a brush. If it's sitting there, the oil wash is sitting there on the model and not moving, your paint's too thick. But there's never any worries. If you make any mistakes with oil paints, just get your white spirits and take it off. You have pretty much unlimited freedom with oil paints, and because we've gloss varnished as well, there's no risk of it staining. If you didn't do a gloss varnish and you just put this on, yes, you can take it off, but if you leave it for 20 minutes or whatever and then try to remove it, there is a good chance that that black will stain the colour underneath, or even like a blue would stain this white. So that's why we do the gloss varnish. And don't use your best brushes. Still use a decent brush that has a nice tip, but nothing that you've spent a lot of money on. You can pick up decently cheap paint brushes for oil paints, on Amazon and whatnot. You don't need to spend a lot. It's just, that tip allows that paint to flow into those recesses. And you can see here what we're doing around the feet, the knees, any sort of indentations on the armor, especially the head. Space Marines are good for this, but what's even better for this is Chaos Space Marines, because of all that trim. So this is the same method that I'm using here to paint these Blood Angels could be used to paint any and all Chaos Space Marines. Space Marines and Chaos Space Marines particularly, because they are effectively cylinders and spheres. Now if you know art, you know how important cylinders and spheres are. compare that to like guardsmen or something that have a lot more, I would say, definition on their armor or their cloth or whatever it may be. But Space Marines and Chaos Space Marines work really, really well. Not that this can't be used for them as well, but something to take into consideration. And like I said, this method can be used for any colour of Space Marine except probably White Scars and Black Templars. But if you want to do yellow, you want to do blue, you want to do red, you want to do green, purple, you know, you can do it. So after this step, we need to do a varnish. Now we use a matte varnish. I use ultra matte. The reason we do this is oil paint is great, but probably one of the downsides to it is when you actually want to move on from it is it drying. Now oil paints can take days if not weeks to fully dry, but the way we speed that up is with a hairdryer and a matte varnish. But what I will say, especially in the deep recesses where a lot of oil can collect, is you want to be able to make sure it's dry, or at least somewhat dry, before hitting it with a hairdryer. Otherwise you're going to just spray that black all over your model. And not that it can be cleaned up, it's just more effort. Now I'm using a makeup blender here, or an egg and sponge egg, I don't know what they're called. You can pick them up from pretty much anywhere in the UK, like Home Bargains, B&M's, Poundland, whatever. I like these over using like a cotton bud because they're a lot bigger and they're pretty much impossible to get into any of the tight recesses. But we're just cleaning up any of those flat areas and taking off any excess oil that we don't want, because we want the actual flat areas to be perfect. Now we're moving on to the red. Red ink from Vallejo and Doomfire Magenta. We are using a 5-to-1 mix of ink to Doomfire Magenta, but feel free to play around with pretty much any ratios here to get what you want. I'm going for a very rich red here. If you wanted to go a little bit darker, use more Doomfire Magenta. But again, I'm skipping steps. Don't forget the gloss varnish. Super important. The matte varnish is super important here because that seals everything in. But I will say, make sure you are happy with this, because once this varnish is on, there is no taking off that oil wash. So you have to be 100% happy with what you have achieved so far before taking this step. If you are, move on. If not, make sure it's fully clean and you're happy with everything. So with the red, in an airbrush, it takes a little bit of persistence here to get the red we're after. Do very, very thin layers. Don't just spray it on like, you know, like a ball in a china shop. You literally want to build it up. You go from this pink, and then you get this sort of, I don't really know the colour, but then you slowly get to do it. And this is basically three layers of red built up with thin layers. And that's the really, really good and beneficial part of using an airbrush, is how, you know, smooth those layers can be and how many you can do. And, you know, the dark parts of the model now have become this reddy brown, and that just brings everything together, and that's our mid-tone that we're after. So yeah, it's super simple. You know, you can't really make any mistake at this point. The hardest part here will just make sure that you don't flood the model with the red ink, because you are basically spraying water through an airbrush. So use a lower PSI, take your time, you know, treat each panel as its own. Don't just think, oh, I've got a spray gun, I can just spray all over it. You know, work on the arm, work on the, you know, the leg. So this is something that I do, and I guess a lot of people do, but some people don't. And the reason I do this is I block in everything that's not red. Because over a army or a squad, you know, if you've got a bit more red on this, you know, chest icon compared to another one, the actual undercoat could change. Now, the chest eagle on this guy is actually going to be like a black grey. But if you was, for instance, doing like the purity seals, if they were red and then you apply, you know, your bone colour over it, you know, compared to a black, you're going to get a different colour of bone. So I always paint things black. Everywhere has sort of a neutral starting point then, so I know over the course of an army, it's all going to be the same. So anywhere that's going to be silver, anywhere that's going to be leather, anywhere that's going to be, you know, gold. I don't think I did any gold on this guy, but, you know, anywhere that isn't red, you paint this. Now, of course, you don't have to do it this way. This is just me, and it's probably being a little bit, you know, pedantic over how I want my models to look. If you're not too bothered about them being completely 100% uniform, then you can pretty much skip this step unless there are parts that you want to be black. But yeah, also I will say you have to take your time now at this point, because the only downside to using an airbrush is it's very hard to fix mistakes. You know, if you was to go in here now with a brush over the red, it would be 100% obvious where that mistake is. Whereas if you was to paint this with a paintbrush and layer up your reds, you could easily fix the mistakes. So especially around the shoulder trim, especially around the chest eagle, you know, they are really, really important areas that need to be perfect, because like I said, it's hard to, if you do make a mistake, always have a clean wet brush at the side of you, so if you do make a mistake you can quickly wipe away. I did make a mistake on this guy at the front. I was doing the sort of soft interior bits around the groin, and I got some on his groin, so you'll see in a second as well what I mean by that. There you go. I have a brush at the side of me, wipe it away, clean brush, and problem is fixed. You just don't want to leave that black on there for too long, because otherwise it will stain your model. Now, one thing I didn't do for this army is for this model is weathering. But if you are planning on weathering your models and you do get black on the armor, you can always use that to your advantage and just use it as weathering. There are always options, you know. Just, you know, if you're not planning on weathering, then you really, really want to make sure that you don't make any mistakes. So with this guy, and especially moving on to the next steps, is how we're going to do the Aquila and the trim. Is we are going to do, it's not glazing as such, but what it is we are using transitions that are very, very similar. So we are using a black and we're using a grey. And we are adding basically a tiny bit of grey to black, a tiny bit more, and those transitions are very, very minute. We don't want any big stark changes. Again, you can fully glaze this if you wanted to. Obviously, if you wanted to do your shoulders gold, you can also do gold. It's entirely up to you. This is just my take. But we're using ash grey and we're using black. If you don't have these colours and you're using Citadel colours, you know, use a Dawnstone and black, use an Administratum grey and black, use a Celestra grey and black. It all depends on what you want as your outcome. And again, the way we do it is we just add less and less and less until we're happy. Now, I didn't want this to be super bright. I didn't want any like white dots to bring it out. I feel like the armor should be the attention, not some random, you know, Aquila on the chest. So I think I do 4 layers there, basically going from black all the way up to a basalt grey. And, you know, we get that transition. And again, and one thing I will say as well, if you are new to painting, paint goes on a lot brighter and when it dries it goes darker. So sometimes you can look at it and think, oh wow, that's quite bright, but you know, let it dry, then make that decision. There's been many times when I was first starting where I did a colour and wasn't a fan, and you know, had to, you know, jump too quick sort of thing and then changed it. But yeah, let it dry and then make a decision. Because there was times when I was doing this grey, I thought, oh, that's a bit bright. But, you know, once it dries and it settles, it actually comes together a lot more. And the transition is pretty much seamless because we used colours that are basically, you know, very, 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 they are the same. You know, we just slowly add more. If you was to go from, say, a neutral grey, like a basalt grey to a neutral grey to a light grey, you know, you would see that transition a lot more, and you'd probably have to glaze it then. But because we take so many little adjustments, we can get away with it. And over the course of an army, saving that time on glazing, you know, is a bonus. Obviously, for your characters and whatnot, then glazing has its place, you know. But I think for infantry and, you know, you're not your standout, you know, they're just infantry, you know, take the skip and, you know, save yourself some time, then put that extra time into your characters or whatever, or your champion of a squad, or a lieutenant of a squad, or whatever the case may be. So we're pretty much there now. We're just doing the last little dots, and yeah, it's super simple, it's super quick, it's super effective, and this works. It's almost like non-metallic metal in a sense, where you're using greys to achieve a silver look, but we're not going that extreme with, you know, the brightness. We're keeping it quite minimal. So we're moving on to the leather. We're just going to use leather brown. We're not going to do anything fancy for the leather. In the end on this model, I ended up changing it like 4 or 5 times. I just couldn't get the right leather colour I wanted. It was too bright. I wanted a more like a Rhinox hide, but literally my paints were what I had out and next to me. I had nothing. So I tried mixing a bit of red into it, turned too pink, and in the end I just settled for you know, something. But again, if you want to go all out on the detail on this model, I will certainly have more tutorials coming on how to do leather properly. Also with like the flamer, it's just a basic flamer. I'm not doing any of the scorch marks on the metallics or anything like that. That'll also be done in future tutorials. Mainly focusing on in this video is the armor. Now for the metallics and the silver here, I personally really like dark silver from Pro Acryl, but again, use what you have available. I feel that this color doesn't need washing. It works really well straight out of the pot, straight onto a middle. So in terms of speed, you know, it saves so much time on so many steps. It sort of has that natural highlight to it, but also a natural shadow to it, which is a unique sense. But in my opinion, Pro Acryl metallics are some of the best metallics out there. Again, there's not much metallics on it. Apologies, air compressor decides to turn on mid-recording, and there's also a dog barking. You can't... We're going on. We're carrying on. I can't be bothered. So, yeah, take your time with these. Again, these are mistakes now that, you know, everything you do now, you have to be 100% accurate. You can't make mistakes because, you know, they're just going to add more time to your army when, you know, and also teaching yourself brush control to never make mistakes. Now, of course, mistakes happen. They are what they are. But, you know, if you can always avoid them, always avoid them. And you'll see here, especially on the big flat area of the flamer that we're going to do metallic, how well this colour just sits. And it works pretty much straight from the pot without the need to, you know, add any washes to it, add any highlights to it. But again, you can. But I'm trying to keep this as minimal and as simple as possible, with the main focus being the armour. You can certainly take every single step I've done and add to it in terms of highlights, shadows, and whatnot. So for the gun, I tried to keep things simple. I tried to do a bit of metallic, keep a bit of black, and add an extra colour to the sort of gas canister at the bottom. And apologies, I'm off screen here, but yeah. So for instance, you know, if you break the gun down, it's pretty much 4 parts. You've got the metallics with the silver. You've got the purity seal, which is, you know, the bone colour and the red, and then you've got the canister at the bottom. So here we go, we're using bronze from Pro Acryl. Really nice colour. Again, just using it from the pot, not doing anything to it whatsoever, because one time. If you wanted to take these steps further, then of course apply a wash to it, highlight it, and whatnot. But again, I think the actual gun turns out alright considering the actual amount of time and effort we put into it. Just the Pro Acryl paints, the metallics are just so good. I can't rate them higher than what I already am. They are really good. If you've never used them, I highly recommend it. The coverage is perfect from them, really. They always cover in one coat, and they always have a lovely smooth finish to them. So wine red, again, use like a corn red here. This is just for the purity seal. I'm using a very watered down mix here because by using a watered down mix and not having a full coverage, it allows a little bit of that black to sort of show through, which works effectively as a non-oil wash. So don't worry about full coverage. Again, it's very minimal. If you wanted to take it the extra step, then feel free to do it. Onto the purity seal, using leather brown again. Now here we're going to be quite quick, and we're going to go from leather brown, and while it's still wet, we're going to start applying I can't remember the colour I used. Light earth, that's it. And while it's still wet, we're applying light earth, and we're basically somewhat mixing on the brush. And before I actually go any further, the actual black here, which I forgot about, is done with the greys that I used for before, but I'm not really doing anything. I'm not edge highlighting, I'm not glazing anything. I'm effectively just doing loads of little scratches, and it's very, very minimal, but it just adds a little something to the black just to take off the edge. Light earth now, here we go. So while that leather brown is still wet, we're going to apply this over it, and I use quite a lot of paint on the brush initially just to get some stroke marks on there, because we want to keep the highlight and we also want to keep the shadow. So these bits here are quite thick, but as the paint comes off the brush, we lose that and then it starts to blend. So it's almost like the loaded brush technique, which I very rarely use, but it is a really good technique to do, and mixing paint directly on the area. This works well for, like I said, this works well for parchments. And there you go, super simple. We have the highlight, we have our mid-tone, we have our shadow. Super quick, super simple. So on to the final step. We're using bold titanium white by Pro-Acryl. Best white out there, don't care what anybody says. This is for the eyes. Very thin, I say very thin down, it is thin down with a little bit of water. We just want it to flow into that recess around the eye. It's going to add a little bit of glowing. It's going to help, with the glowing effect. We don't want just a dot on the eye, because that's not going to give us anything. And if you ever struggle to find out what colour you want to do people's eyes, or you want to know what colour to do the plasma glow, or you want to add a bit of OSL to the base, is just go onto Google and type in complementary colour wheel. I think there's a good one by Canva. If you just select the colour of your model, if you're doing, for instance, Blood Angels, then we would, select the red, and it would give us the colour that is the complementary colour. Now, in the case of this, it works out pretty well because it's basically achromatic blue contrast. And this is something that you could apply, to if you had a plasma gun or a plasma pistol, you could use this. Just using it straight from the pot onto the eyes, 2 coats in total, and of course I do it off camera. No, we don't. I remember to put it in frame. It's quite a weak colour, so it takes a few coats to get there, but once it's there, it works really well. If you don't have this similar colour, then you could always mix something together, you could use like a Temple Guard blue, basically, thin down to the same sort of consistency as a contrast paint, or whatever. But if you ever struggle to know what your colour to do the eyes and the plasma, like I said, go to Canva. If you're using ultramarine, set it to the blue you're using. If you're doing salamanders, set it to the green you're using. Super simple. And yeah, that's basically it. So there we have it. Model done. Super quick, super simple. Hope you guys liked it.